Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, August 13th, 2018. Time for yet another show. Time for yet another week of insanity. How'd you like the pre-recorded program for Friday? I know I hated to leave you for Friday, but it was important to go to the dentist. By the way, we got nothing done at the dentist. Everything's okay. It's just everything was exactly what we thought it was, and there was really very little we could do about it. And so here we are, back on the show. I wish I had pre-recorded. I wish Omarosa had pre-recorded my show. Maybe I can get her to do that. She's probably looking for something to do now, although I guess, well, she's probably pretty well taken care of. Probably has a huge book advance. I'm not certain. I don't know what to think of what she's got on the president. I don't think it tells me anything new, but I guess any more evidence on tape that he's an idiot, I suppose, is generally a good thing. I'm not an Omarosa fan. And by the way, I've learned, I guess over the weekend, I hear everybody pronounces it Omarosa, so I guess I'm wrong about that. Sorry, Omarosa, or something like that. Don't know what to make of that story other than, once again, it highlights the fact, for instance, that, this morning's twist on things is the new tape she's releasing. And I guess she's smart. She knows how to do television. She's releasing them in drips and drabs. This morning's release, or I don't know, maybe she did it yesterday and it's only hitting the news cycle this morning, is that Trump claims he has no idea that she was dismissed from the White House, and that the story is supposed to be that Chief of Staff Jim Kelly is running the show, and Trump is basically a prisoner in the White House and has no idea what's going on in his staff. And I fully believe that could be the case. On the other hand, that the story wouldn't get back to him, or he wouldn't be briefed about it. I don't know whether I believe that, but so he's either, of course, an incompetent fool or a total liar. And the track record inside the White House has been the guy whose signature line from his fake TV show, his fake reality TV show, we should stop calling it reality TV, is that, he's such a hard-nosed businessman. He actually delights in delivering the bad news, the ultimate bad news in business. You're fired. His big signature line he doesn't do. Not that I care for people to do their television catch lines, but, let's see. Reince Priebus was fired this way. Remember, everybody got off of Air Force One, or made, fake walk steps towards the door, and then everybody takes a step, and then Reince steps out and gets in the car, and they all wait, and then he waits, the president waits on Air Force One for somebody else to fire Reince, and then drive him away, and only then will the president even get off the car. He doesn't even want to see him. And then this phone call with Omarosa, I guess he either pretends or is, for real about it. I don't know which exactly. Although it makes it, quite honestly, he just sounds like he's doing a terrible job lying. Oh, I can't believe it. Nobody told me. Nah, they don't tell me anything. God damn it. Anyway, not sure exactly what parts to care most about that nothing story, but it's interesting once again that he doesn't do his own firing. He's not the tough guy anybody thought he was. Interesting to watch him when he does think he's being a tough guy, as was the case over the weekend. He had the Bikers for Trump visit him at Bedminster. I'm sure the folks of Bedminster were so happy about that. And Paul Waldman observing yesterday, it's weird, every time the president, what does he say, encounters one or another of these avatars of masculinity, which I guess is what he was trying to say the bikers were, which perhaps credits them with too much anything, I guess. He does this thing where, to look tough, he purses his lips in this really weird fashion. His face is effed up. Let's be honest about that. And it's just curious, the facial expressions that he thinks look tough. It's kind of weird to explain. What do you mean that's your tough guy face? But between that and the weird pout that he did with those pictures with Melania in the golden piano room, he's got a very strange idea about well, everything in the world. It's just one of those personality quirks. He's socially awkward. He doesn't know what faces to make. What can I tell you? He paints his face orange and gives himself reverse raccoon eyes and says, I did this on purpose because I'm going out in public. I don't think it's ever going to change. So lots of weird stories, lots of weird things happening over the weekend, some considerably more substantial than these, but it always pays to start off the week by reminding you your president is just completely insane and has no one around him that's worth the goddamn thing, and they're supposedly running this country. So we'll catch up with all the other people who are also worthless and doing very little. And I guess we should be glad when they are incapable of getting anything done. But in the meantime, yeah, some tremendous evils are being perpetrated purely because of the fact that people occupy these offices that we feel they're entitled to because, I don't know, the Electoral College said they didn't have the power to do anything about an obvious fakery and made him president. And now they all stand there and do the things that they do, and the press covers it as if, a proper role for the Justice Department is keeping people from voting or denying people justice. Well, they're saying it from this podium, so that must be justice. We'll report that the Justice Department says this thing, even though it's monumental injustice, but on we go, because we don't know what else to do. We might as well get to our routine. Greg is here. Let's figure out what other routines have been disrupted, which in business is supposed to be an awesome thing, over the weekend. Good morning, Greg.
Hi, good morning. That usually means somebody's fired, right?
Yes, well, right. Today, Oma Ama Ima Rosa is what we're talking about. She taped her firing. It doesn't tell me very much, except that they're taping inside the White House, which is bad.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is, in fact, exactly what you said in regard to, what does it mean? So let's look at some of those stories.
What did I say? All right. I'll.
Well, for example, we have Omarosa in the Situation Room.
Yes.
We have the Manafort trial. We have Charlottesville anniversary. We have Chris Collins out in New York 27 for insider trading. A lot of this stuff has happened since I was on the show last. And we have some observations about the coming blue wave in November and local polling, state and House seats to discuss. So that's what's on my agenda for today.
I am willing to discuss those items.
Okay. Something else also occurred to me, though, on more of a personal note as I was listening to the show. I am strongly considering retiring from medicine next year.
Oh?
I'll be 65.
Okay, well, that's the time people do things like that.
Sometimes people stay in it longer and sometimes they don't. And I'm considering not, it's not firmed up, but, that's certainly on my mind.
Okay.
And I was listening to your description of the show, just a couple of moments of description of the show, and I was trying to think of an analogy for why a doctor would get out of medicine.
Mm-hmm.
And your show came to mind for me.
I'm driving people out of medicine.
No. Think of it this way. Remember when you first started the show, it was kind of freeform?
Yes.
And it was a lot of fun, and you got to talk to about whatever you wanted. And then over time, out of necessity, it became a little bit more structured.
Yes, I think maybe you could say
right? that. You have breaks at certain times.
Oh, yes, we had that.
For example. And, as you start to expand and become, let's say, on terrestrial radio, you have to watch a little bit your language. I think that's why we don't have Armando on as often as we used to. Right? And so, you have to, there are sort of rules, written and unwritten, that you kind of adapt in order to make it work. But imagine the show for you, okay, if you then had 7-minute breaks.
Yes.
Breaks every 7 minutes, and you had to start reading commercials.
Yeah, that would be.
And the commercials were for things like ambulance chasers, homeopathic medicines that don't work, vitamins
so
you can give
rich.
to your dog that don't really do anything. But you had to, because that's how you had to make a living.
I knew there was a way to do this. All right, yeah.
Right? Would it be
Right.
fun?
I will tell you if it happens.
Would you continue doing it after a while if that's like you didn't even really have any time to talk about individual issues of depth, because you only had these 6 or 7 minute slots, and then you had to go to commercial break and then
I guess
change.
I would not want to.
And then what if on top of all of that they said, by the way, we looked at the audience who's listening to you. They don't really want you to talk about process in Congress.
Oh. Wow. Well,
But you can do everything else, have your 7-minute stuff. You have to read the commercials. It's really important. And let's be clear, the commercials are more important than the content.
Wow. Yeah.
So you really want to spend all of your time working on the commercials. And now the commercials, of course, in my setting, it's the electronic medical record. Now the commercials are more than 50% of the show.
Well, that's fun.
And you have to spend your time doing that, because the purpose of the commercials is to get paid. The purpose of the electronic record is to get paid. And so now you have the opportunity to maybe do something else. Do you think you would take that opportunity?
Yeah. I wish I had opportunities, but if I had them, I might think, yeah.
I'm just saying,
I agree.
So for physicians, that's actually, how it feels these days.
Well, that's I could understand that, and although maybe only physicians understand thinking of practicing medicine as fun, but things that you love to do, that doesn't always mean you're playing games.
I mean, that's why you got into
nice
the deal.
things.
You'd like to spend your time talking to people.
Well, clearly,
not
there's a reason
writing,
you did this.
in charts.
Right. And I suppose there are some people, obviously there are some people who only do what they do because, well, it's a great way to make lots of money. And I suppose they're happy. But maybe not. Maybe they're...
Yeah, but they're the Republicans in medicine.
They too maybe say, oh, I want the money. I don't want to do all this stupid work. I just want to get money. That could drive them crazy too. But yeah, I imagine that, I guess probably a lot of jobs are like that. And medicine perhaps more so than most, just because we like to think of our doctors
everybody works at
about
jobs
medicine,
they don't necessarily love.
Yeah, sure.
I get that. You have to provide for your family. You have to make a living. You have to do stuff that you don't necessarily want to do. But there are a few jobs that I'm personally that familiar with that I can speak to it. There are many jobs that fall in this category, but few jobs that I can speak to.
The ones you've done.
Where the change from when I started to where I am now has just been so profound. And that's true in a lot of different places. And as a matter of fact, because of that, there are people who don't work there anymore, changed by, let's say, automation, which is the big factor in driving whatever unemployment there is and changes in the market. Productivity increases, but it's not necessarily because each individual worker is more productive. It's because there's fewer of them doing the same amount of work, because automation makes that happen. And, that's part of the future too. So there's lots of industries that are changing. And, whether you call it a good way or a bad way depends upon where you are. Where you stand depends upon where you sit. But this is one I know, and so I'm speaking about it because it's just something I happen to know about.
Well, that's kind of sad. In a way, I mean, it's a worthy message and everything. We've come to know you as Dr. Greg, and now what will we call you? You'll still be a doctor, of course.
I'll still be a doctor.
Yeah, it's just kind of one of those.
I just won't be working at the same thing, doing the same thing. That's all. I'll be doing something else. I
guess so. Yeah. Well, that's sad that you would feel that, things end this way, but of course it has been. You made it to 65. That's a long career.
Well, I haven't made it yet. But,
that's
on my way.
You're on schedule. I'm going to watch
next year. I ought to be able to actually get there.
All right. Well, that's where the destination is. We'll get there, and then we'll move on to the next one. But all right. Well, I guess more and more people. You'll just have to ask your electronic medical record if Tylenol is right for you from now on.
Right.
Doctors won't have the time to do it.
I'll still be doing something with medicine, I'm sure, and maybe I get to do more pro bono stuff even than I do now. But it's without the restraints or constraints of having to worry about every 7 minutes doing that commercial.
Well, that's true, and maybe you'll prevent a flu pandemic one day with all this extra time.
Yeah, you can always do that. I mean, we're due for another one.
Sure.
I say that because they always come no matter what you do.
Well, yes. There's always another one around the corner. Unless, of course, it now has to maintain electronic medical records. In which
right.
It has
I mean,
no
if
time
the flu had to document what it was doing, it just wouldn't come.
This is right, yeah.
Basically what happens. Maybe
You're
that's what
at
we
a
should
disadvantage.
do. We should pass a rule.
All right. Well, you're allowed to infect people, but only after you've finished the electronic medical record filing on it.
Right.
Oh, it's not fun to be a virus anymore.
Let's get back to what's actually in the news.
All right.
And, there is plenty in the news. The Pundit Roundup today, on Mondays, often it's like, well, let's round up what happened over the weekend because a lot of stuff happened.
Yeah.
I'm going to start with Harry Enton, who's now writing for CNN.
Oh,
he still does stuff for 538, I'm not sure, but definitely CNN now. He writes, a blue wave is probably coming, or maybe we should call it a blue blizzard.
Oh.
He says that because a blue wave implies there's small waves and large waves, and a blue blizzard, glides around having to say how big, just that it's coming.
Okay.
And he talks about election polls. He's interviewed here by CNN. Election polls aren't the only misconception on Enton's mind. He also takes issue with how Trump's approval rating is reported on by the media. This will sound familiar to you because it bugs me too. This is one of the most bizarre things that has occurred in our press over the last 2 years, Enton said. People are reporting Trump's approval rating among the GOP as if it's as important as his approval rating overall. He says the core Republican electorate only makes up about 25% of all voters, and this doesn't indicate how the midterm elections will turn out or reflect the electorate at large. At the end of the discussion, Brian Stelter read questions from his newsletter readers, one of which asked Enton to justify his professional existence.
So he retired.
What the hell are you doing?
Yeah, justify your existence.
Stelter clarified, posing the question whether polling helps the public. And we see that a lot. I see that at Daily Kos all the time. I'm sick and tired of polling. Polling screwed us in 2016. Actually, the polling was more or less right on 2016. And what Harry says is the polling can help tell the truth we can throw up against politicians' lies. It's another way of fact-checking. It's another way of investigative journalism, Enton said. There's going to be coverage of campaigns no matter what we do. And polling, I think, helps tell a more accurate story for journalists and therefore helps inform the citizenry better.
Okay.
And I think that's true. I always think, just because of my professional and blogging lifetime, of the Bush era, the W era, where way past his born-again date, the media was referring to Bush as the popular president, even after his polls had tanked.
Right.
And it's like, guys, he's in the 30s. Why do you keep calling him popular? Because right after 9/11, he was really popular. But it's not right after 9/11 anymore.
Well, that's
change.
Yeah, it's a good reminder, I guess. Paul Ryan is a serious policy wonk. Why do you say that? He, now it's clear that he has no idea what he's doing. Yeah, but he was one once. No, he wasn't. You said he was, but...
Oh, strong leaders, also strong leaders.
Oh, right, yeah, that too. Hairline, whatever.
Something like that. So in the Pundit Roundup, I also included some a tweet chain here from Charles Franklin, Polls and Votes, MU Law Poll, on Nixon, Watergate, and partisan opinion.
Okay.
And I just threw that in at the end of our Skype list here so you can find it easy. Because it's got pictures and graphs.
Uh-oh.
But the topic comes up often enough these days, and I think it worthwhile to lay out the facts in some detail in hopes of clarifying how partisans and the public at large reacted and when.
Okay.
Start with Nixon's approval by party over his entire term. Nixon was fairly popular through the first term.
Yeah.
Right? Almost always over 50%. And then hovering at, or just below that for most of 1971. He was elected in 68.
All right.
Okay. And to modernize, the most striking fact is approval among Democrats is pretty reasonable. Pretty strong. High 40s in 69, around 40 in 70. Mid-30s in 71. And rising back to the 40s in 1972.
Nixon Democrats. They didn't call them, but they could have.
Right, but they could have. Compare the opposition party approval since 2005. And that's been about 10%. So it was a different era then.
Well, he was doing different things besides burglarizing Watergate.
Among other things, he was promising to end the Vietnam War.
Right. That sounds like it would have been popular
with Democrats.
Yes. Environmental laws that he passed.
But it's really the Vietnam War that was driving everything there.
Okay, fair enough. I know some bikers who know some people who were in the Vietnam War.
Right. Look, if you were a Democrat and were opposed to the war, and you had a draft number,
yes,
and Nixon promised to end the war,
you would be happy about that.
you'd be happy. Exactly right. Something that doesn't exist these days. Republican approval held in the low to mid 80s until 1971. And then it was about 90% in the run-up to the 72 election. You know, that sounds familiar, right? I mean, that's where Trump is now with Republicans.
Right.
Okay.
That's what happens.
The overlap between the overall and the independent is fairly common in approval by partisan. We see that now. If you want to look at, let's say, Trump's approval rating, you can just look at Trump's approval rating among independents. This can be very similar. Okay. Usually, yes, the Republicans like him, Democrats hate him, and it balances out. Mm-hmm. And then where he is depends upon where the independents are. And by the way, that's the group that wins and loses elections. I'm not saying moderates, I'm saying independents. So currently, independents are a bit below Trump's overall approval. Had Nixon left office on January 9th, 1973, he would have gone out with a very high 67% approval rating in the weight of a landslide re-election and the Paris Peace Accords.
That would have
finally
been an unusual thing.
We thought, Vietnam War.
Okay.
Yep. But he didn't leave office. In the next 9 months, showed one of the sharpest sustained declines in the history of presidential approval, dropping 4.1 points per month from late January to early October. So he just tanked.
That is
from 67 to 30.
Okay.
All right. And that's the overall story. Almost all the decline in Nixon's approval took place between February and October of 1973, which was a period of continuous damaging news stories about Watergate and a summer of televised Senate hearings.
Yes. Okay.
By the time the Saturday Massacre came around, Saturday Night Massacre, where he fired the special prosecutor, Nixon's approval had already reached its steady state low point. So he didn't tank because he fired Archibald Cox. He was already down. And that just kept him down.
I see.
So the point of all of this, and Franklin goes on to say, the massacre itself and subsequent revelations, including tape transcripts, didn't really change his approval ratings. The shocking Saturday Night Massacre Nixon cited as an unindicted co-conspirator, the release of the tape transcripts that induced expletive deleted to the lexicon barely moved opinion. And that's because people had already decided that, he was bad. So Charles Franklin, points out that approval collapse is really due to the 9 months of bad stories. So when you try to look at it where we are here and where we are now and relate it to the Trump thing, he doesn't do that. But you can draw your own conclusions. You can write your own story here. Either this is proof that when something bad does happen, if he should fire Mueller, that's not the thing that changes opinion. Or you can turn around and say, yeah, but the public doesn't really know a lot about what's going on. Thanks to Fox News, they're essentially shielded from actual information. So when information actually comes out, and it's steady because it's information that you can't ignore. If Mueller comes out with a bad report, if he indicts Don Jr. for the sake of argument, just as a talking point, you can't ignore that. You can't pretend it didn't happen. And if this is a revelation to the public who never expected such a thing because they were conditioned to think of this as a witch hunt, and it turns out there really are witches, then that indeed could have a profound effect on public opinion. And that would probably precede anything that Trump would do. So the parallels are there to an extent. To me, I look at it and say the fact that somebody's approval rating stays high until it drops, is kind of obvious. Again, people are conditioned to W. Right after 9/11, it skyrocketed, and then just almost on a straight line every month just sort of went down. And people became conditioned to think that that's the way it normally looks. It's not. It was artificially elevated by 9/11, and that's not what typically happens. Something like this is what more typically happens. The support stays steady until it collapses, and then you go, oh, my goodness, I didn't see that coming. because everybody knows that nobody ever changes their mind, except they do.
I guess so, at some point.
It's just that you have to give them enough information to be able to do that. And I remind you that more recent polling, looking at Mueller and the FBI probe, we talked about this on the show, noted that about half of the Republicans said they hadn't really totally made up their minds yet. They needed more information. And the rest of them said, well, it's a witch hunt. I've already made up my mind. So the point is that you really have to give people information before you can expect them to have some sort of reasonable conclusion about what to do. And what the Trump administration as a whole has done for the entire time that they are there is hide information from the public. That is what they do. That's probably the only thing they're good at, and they're not terribly good at it because they can't do it forever, and all this stuff comes out eventually. But what they do is hide information.
Yes, and information that somehow escapes, they obfuscate.
Well, but then it comes out, like putting, people in baby cages at the border.
Right.
They'd like you not to know that.
That would be good for them.
Or the Muslim ban, as it originally went into effect, they'd like you not to know that they're doing it and how many. But all that stuff comes out. The courts wind up ruling on it. They can't get away with it forever. It sours people. Those folks don't go back. It's a little by little erosion. And you see it not in whether or not Republicans support Trump. As Harry Enton said, it's a waste of time looking at that. But rather, you look at the strong support versus non-strong support. Strong opposition is double strong support. That's really where all of this is going eventually.
All right. Well, hurry up already. I'm waiting. But I guess...
I'll have to take a break, so you can't
okay.
do that.
You'll have to wait 2 minutes at the very least before Trump is driven from office. If it happens in the break, we'll be back to tell you. My guess is that it won't have happened until, probably not at least until the 10 o'clock hour, which is fine because we can report on it then. All right. We'll be back in 2. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. By the way, this just out, I guess Donald Trump has just woken up and seen on television that Omarosa, and my pronunciation corrected again, Rebecca says it's Omarosa. Or was it, who said it was Omarosa? Yeah, it was Rebecca. Rebecca Romans, thank you very much. She pronounces it Omarosa. Donald Trump mispronounces it Omarosa. He must have woken up and heard the tape of him saying, oh, I didn't know anything about it. Oh, I wish you hadn't left. This is terrible. And I guess he decided his only option was to tweet out wacky Omarosa, or as he would say, Omarosa, who got fired 3 times on The Apprentice, now fired for the last time. She never made it, never will. She begged me for a job. You've heard that line before. Tears in her eyes. I said, okay. People in the White House hated her. She was vicious, but not smart. But not smart. That's interesting. Very telling, too. I would rarely see her, but heard, blah, 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 blah. Who knows when he's going to continue this tweet. He sometimes has 20-minute gaps in between, but he left it with an ellipsis. Maybe we'll check in on what other thing. I don't know why he thinks anybody believes this beg me for a job story still.
Oh, well, I'll tell you why.
Okay.
It's because he surrounds himself with people who are completely and totally dependent upon him.
That's true.
And that's how and why, because, people like Michael Cohen and Omarosa can't otherwise make it. And so they're completely dependent on him, but not loyal. And so it makes him feel like he's the superstar because look at all these people who look up to me. I hired them for that purpose. I hired them to love me.
Well, that must be the answer to this. The first comment in response to his tweet is somebody who says, him saying, well, she got fired 3 times on The Apprentice and now for the final time, which, of course, this person observes, bro, you hired her 4 times.
Right, exactly.
There's no
For
other way
every
around it.
comment about Omarosa,
Yes.
the answer is, why did you hire her?
Yeah. I mean, that's the
And so
part that
I
makes
have
it
a couple of
impossible
tweets
to
here
enjoy
on
the
that. I
story.
had at the Pundit Roundup, which kind of summarized the situation.
Okay.
Robert McGuire here tweeting, this is crazy. Omarosa secretly recorded Chief of Staff John Kelly in the Situation Room. I read that, and I really thought about Dr. Strangelove. Right, George C. Scott saying, he's taking pictures of the big board and then tackles the Russian ambassador. And Peter Sellers, as president, says, gentlemen, you can't fight in here. It's the war room.
Please. Protocol.
So David Frum writes, if Omarosa
Yes.
carried, for example, a cell phone into the Situation Room,
Yes.
then not only did she record conversations there,
Yes.
but so potentially has any country or criminal organization that thought to hack her phone.
Yes.
Dan
That's
Dresner
just her
says,
phone.
thank goodness Hillary Clinton, whose subordinates have been accused of being lax with national security, is not the president of the United States.
Yeah. Lock her up.
Vote vets. Here's the stone cold fact. OPSEC, Operation Security, in this White House is so riddled with holes that a third-rate reality show contestant was able to use her phone to record in the Situation Room and leave the White House in possession of that recording. Another fact, the GOP won't do a damn thing about it.
Yes. Oh, and emphasis there is leave the White House with that recording. Not she didn't leave it for them to peruse. She left with it. She walked straight out
Right.
the door. They didn't stop her. They're usually on top of. I don't know what they do about people who are surreptitiously taping. But,
See, Sherwood Spooner, who's one of our editors,
yes.
had a daughter who worked for the Obama administration and was once given a tour of the White House
Yeah.
and was taken past the Situation Room with the door closed.
Okay.
Not in it, but past it.
That's
And there was
the
a
situation.
bin outside the Situation Room. That's where you're supposed to put your phones.
Oh. Okay.
So you put your phones in there, then you go in there, then you pick up your phone when you come out. That was standard operating procedure. The
Yes.
idea that somebody would actually bring their phone in
yeah.
would be anathema to the Obama administration and any other administration.
Well, people who take things seriously. They say the Trump administration is show me where it's in the Constitution where I have to put my phone in there, and even if it's there, it's wrong anyway.
So then the
So no
speculation starts. Mm-hmm. I mean, with there's the legal situation that Omarosa may find herself in because what she did is probably, as the people on MSNBC called it yesterday, a bunch of technical violations of the law.
Oh, okay.
To me, technical violations of the law are what we civilians call violations of the law, breaking the law.
Yeah, technically we do say that.
Right? But why would John Kelly bring her into the Situation Room?
I don't know.
And the answer, the
Oh.
best answer Twitter came up
Yeah.
with is because he probably assumed she was taping and also assumed she'd never be crazy enough to bring tape stuff into a SCIF, a secure facility.
Yeah, maybe.
So he picked one he had access to because he figured that's the only place I could do this where Omarosa wouldn't be taping me. And, of course, she was taping him.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty weird.
But
I mean,
it says a lot about Omarosa, but it also says a lot about John Kelly and his judgment.
does. I don't know. I hadn't really thought about it. I just sort of imagined it was like that's where he is, and he was working, and they had a meeting. The meeting broke up. Oh yeah, now it's time to fire Omarosa.
Well, what would she be doing in the Situation Room in the first
I think
place?
it would just be like a matter of I have some phone calls to make here after the meeting. Have one of my staffers. You know what? Bring Omarosa here. I got to fire her. Omarosa, come in here. Oh, really?
That's
Wow,
something you do
awesome.
in your office. I think he
I
did
guess.
it because he was worried about her taping everything.
That would be much more
Because he
interesting
was
to
already
me.
firing her for ethical violations.
Yeah, which
You know,
ones?
using White House drivers to drive her everywhere,
Yeah,
having her wedding party on the
That
White
was
House,
awesome.
all taxpayer money.
Yeah, I loved
kind of thing.
that one. I was glad I paid for that. Yeah, she was. I mean, what can I tell you? I don't care. Lock her up. I mean, maybe her tapes are interesting. Maybe they're not. I don't care. But I'll lock them all up. They're all idiots as far as I'm concerned. But yes, it's certainly a good point that they've never been on top of security there. And it's my guess, though, that you could have gotten even that particular tape. I think there are probably multiple sources for that tape, and only some of them are American to begin with anyway. That Omarosa was the first to market is great for her book, but I'm sure everybody else knows that and has it on tape anyway. And that might have come from her phone, might have come from things that Sergei Kislyak left behind when he came in on his own for a tour of the White House. I don't know.
Right. So again, what's on the tape is pretty tame. That's not the point, really.
Stupid tape.
It's the fact that it was taped, the fact that she was in the Situation Room, the fact that Kelly allowed this to happen, and that he hasn't resigned in disgrace.
He's a general.
Well, there's a lot of things he could have resigned disgrace over, but this is just the whole thing is just astounding.
Yes, but man, USA. Military.
USA, okay.
Space
Other
Force,
astounding
all
things.
the way.
So Trump's strongest and first supporter in Congress, Chris Collins, was forced to resign over the weekend, and that's because he was caught out in insider trading stuff.
Yes, or as he calls it, trading.
Making a living.
Right.
And so the interesting thing is what happens now. Okay, because he's on the ballot.
Oh.
And in New York, you can't get off the ballot.
I know that ballots are tough things in New York, certainly. A lot of problems with that.
Right. He has to run for something else, but then he'd kick somebody else off to do that. So Representative Collins' name will remain on the ballot in the November midterm election in New York 27, unless challenged in court, which is possible. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that he gets his name off the ballot. But the Democrat who's running, who is a fellow named McMurray, Nate McMurray, who's a Grand Island town supervisor, has already called for Collins not just to not run, but also to resign, which Collins hasn't done. Yes. And, of course, no GOP has asked him to do so. And he has been campaigning since January, and in that district his name is fairly well known. So to pull out somebody at the very last minute, even if Collins' name could come off the ballot, and then have this unknown beat somebody who's been running for elections since January and is known to the district and campaigning on corruption, or will if he hasn't already, it is an interesting concept. But it's like I don't have the numbers in front of me, but it's like a Trump plus 27 district. So whoever the Republican would in a normal situation would be pretty strong. But now I don't think you can rate it as anything more than likely Republican.
I guess.
That's about the strongest you can do it. And so imagine the scenario where Collins isn't running, but his name is on the ballot because you can't take it off.
Right.
And he wins.
Oh. I hadn't imagined
right?
that.
So voters could elect him even though his campaign is suspended.
Yes.
Then he'd probably have to resign, and then they'd do a special election.
Maybe. Because
I don't think Congress would seat him. That's how it works, right? So if he's elected, Congress can say, no, you can't.
They can say that. I don't know what they would.
In this setting, if he's on trial, they might actually go that far.
They might. You would think.
Because why else would he not be running? He said he was going to run, defy the odds, I'm innocent, and then all of a sudden he changed his mind and said he's not running. That only could be from party pressure.
I'm resigning because I'm going to decline.
I have to spend more time with my family who's also going to be in jail, so I want to be with them.
Maybe. Or I would, you could send me papers in jail.
And in this case,
I could work
they
there.
will be in jail because it's insider trading, and he gave all the information to his son.
Right. He'll spend more time with his family, all right, in prison.
In jail.
Yeah. Well, that's where they're going. He should go, too. He could just take an extended leave of absence. They could grant him that.
So what would happen with that? If he wins and then he takes an extended leave of absence, what does that mean? What does Congress do? Do they have to seat him?
No, they don't have to. They also don't have to do anything. A Republican majority Congress that's completely crazy and stays completely crazy.
Well, it won't be a Republican majority Congress.
Yeah, well, if it's not, then we all get candy and pizza for free. I hope it isn't. It's not supposed to be.
So let's say, for the sake of argument, it's a Democratic Congress.
All right. Well,
he wins.
What happens? They would. I guess they would, at best, his best hope is they would refer his case to the House Administration Committee, and they would have hearings. What do you think we should do? And they would say, well, he's in jail. We should not seat him and declare a vacancy. All right, and I'd send that resolution to the floor. They would. I guess at that point, you could refuse his credentials, or you could seat him provisionally with the intention of expelling him afterwards. That's the two options if they want him out of there.
Right. So when I think about this whole thing, Nancy Pelosi may well not be Speaker. There may be enough people who want a new generation that she is only Speaker for a while, or she turns out not to be Speaker at all.
Or she doesn't say very many things when she's Speaker.
But
speak very little, yeah.
When I think of Nancy Pelosi as Speaker, I think of something like this coming to her desk and her saying, you know what, I got this. There's three options. I already know what they are.
Yes, that's true. And that's one of the advantages of, somebody who's actually experienced. But I guess on the other hand, if you're worried about that, and it's a brand new person who has no idea, the parliamentarians will tell them.
Yeah. So roll call says Grand Island Town Supervisor Nate McMurray, the Democrat challenging Collins, has said he's seen a boost in fundraising since the news broke, and McMurray could be better known than another Republican candidate, given he's been campaigning through the expansive district since launching his bid in January. So that's something that's worthwhile watching. It's all part of how do waves happen, because individual things all seem to happen like this.
Lightning
because
strikes.
Don't forget, Collins may have given advice to other Republicans who it may involve 5 or 6 of his colleagues.
Yes.
Certainly involves Tom Price. We talked about that last week.
Brett Kavanaugh, I believe.
So
we will find out later on. But my solution for the people up in the Republicans up in Buffalo, Ron Estes is available.
Anyway. So is the other Ron Estes.
And also, obviously, the other solution is find another Chris Collins. There's probably another one in the district. Harold Ford Jr. might run for you guys. I don't know.
Yeah, he'll run for anybody.
But they could just find another person. I mean, really, literally, just find another Chris Collins. I'd just do that.
From the bigot party, I forget. He usually parachutes in and runs.
Oh yeah, who does that all the time? Well, you can find somebody, I'm sure, and I bet you really could find a Chris Collins. And I would imagine, though, that probably an emergency basis, Republican Party there seems like they have things well in hand in the district that could probably get a judge to issue some sort of order and, make a quick swap. It happens.
Right. So meanwhile, stepping back and looking at big picture stuff, Harry Enton mentioned he had that interview, and then he had a tweet that followed and said, I'm looking at Scott Walker's polling.
Scott Walker. Okay. Why?
We should believe it. It's actually pretty bad.
Oh, well, easy to believe.
There's not that anything new came out, but he was just reviewing stuff for an article I guess he was writing.
Yes.
And so I felt I should look it up and see what he was talking back. In July, of course, we had the NBC Marist poll that were very favorable for Democrats in the Midwest. Do you feel Scott Walker deserves to be reelected governor of Wisconsin, or do you think it's time to give a new person a chance? 34% deserves to be elected, 61% time for a new person, and then the head-to-head Tony Evers will be the likely Democrat running against him. And Scott Walker matchup head-to-head in July, NBC Marist poll, Scott Walker 41, Tony Evers 54.
Yeah, that's
now, there was an earlier Marquette Law School poll, which I like better. I think it's just a little more realistic. And that had Walker leading Evers by 4 points. But for an incumbent, that's still not great news. And so, that's part of a bigger picture that Kyle Kondik was tweeting about. He says the Midwest has 6 big governor races this year: Illinois, Minnesota, Michigan, Ohio, Iowa, Wisconsin. The Republicans control 5 out of 6, all but Minnesota. And it seems possible that the Democrats could sweep all 6 this fall.
I would take that. That would be great.
Right? And then, so what would that mean for the House? It might mean a gain of 7 to 10 seats because of various and sundry things that happens, from electing to, ultimately district, reorganization, redistricting and stuff.
Yes.
And Kyle Kondik said, here's the big thing, though. Democrats very well may gain seats in some of those seats anyway. But even compromise maps would be significantly better for them than what they have now. So just like the Supreme Court, Armando will be the first to remind you, everybody looks at the president and the Senate races, top of ticket stuff. Of course, the House. But the reason that the state legislature and governor races matter is for redistricting and ultimately deciding who gets to vote.
Yes, that's true. And having Democrats in charge of at the very least, the sign-off portion in many states, the way they do their redistricting is going to be Very important. The Republicans have been using it strategically for years.
For a decade.
Yeah, and
which is why we are where we are. But it's not a presidential election. I don't usually vote on non-president,
right.
But this is why you should.
Right. And, it takes actually usually less time than a presidential election to actually go and cast that vote. The lines are not nearly as long.
Right.
Try it.
Other signs and symptoms out there in terms of what's going on. This is from August 3rd from Vox. New polls show Ted Cruz could really lose in 2018.
Nice
Democrat Beto O'Rourke is closing in on Cruz in Texas, but people still don't know who he is. That's his secret superpower. Nobody knows who he is.
Oh.
So he has room to grow.
Okay.
Quinnipiac had O'Rourke 6 points behind. Texas Lyceum, with a smaller sample size, had Cruz up by just 2 points. And it's becoming a very real possibility that Beto could win. I think it's a tough hill, but if they don't win, then what winds up happening is that Democrats will take the Senate. That's a big, a tough hill to climb, a mountain. But it's at least conceivable, whereas 6 months ago it really wasn't even conceivable. It was how many seats are the Republicans going to win, and how can you hold that margin down?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad for the change.
All right, and before we finish, I have to mention what's going on with Charlottesville and the anniversary thereof, and of course Laura Ingraham and her move to full-out fascism. David Newart, who tracks these things for Southern Poverty Law Center, but was tracking it way before then, has a nice tweet storm there. As always, Kevin Cruz, who's a historian, has done a superb job limiting the historical resonances of Laura Ingraham's recent remarks that because of immigration, the America we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Yeah. And that would be, kind of a bad thing. So what do we have here on it? Oh, it's one of those situations on Twitter. If you click on it, the whole thing disappears.
I have.
Luckily, I put it aside somewhere else here.
Well, you sent it to me in Skype, so there's always that.
I did. Now I have to go find where I put it on Skype.
It's a little bit up from the bottom.
And there it is. Yeah,
right.
That's the same problem you have when I send you things on Skype. So as he says, these are remarks straight out of historical white supremacist ideology. Let's go a little deeper. He particularly notes that this upwelling of white supremacy ultimately resulted in the passage in 1924 of the National Origins Act, subsumed under the broader 1924 Immigration Act, which second component was the complementary Asian Exclusion Act.
At least they name it. Those were the days when they named bills what they were.
Right, and he's got a big picture of a Fu Manchu guy with long fingernails trying to take over the world, called the Yellow Danger.
Well,
or the Yellow Peril.
My goodness.
You may remember it as that.
Yes.
It's important to understand that this anti-Asian component was in fact the primary driver in this legislation, and hysteria over Asian immigration, the predominant fuel in the propaganda campaigns that led to the passage, which genuinely had dire consequences. They called it the Yellow Peril. Yikes. It was essentially a conspiracy theory which posited that the Japanese emperor intended to invade the Pacific coast and was sending these immigrants to American shores as shock troops to prepare the way for just such military action. These immigrants, as it was believed, would lay the groundwork for acts of sabotage and espionage when the signal was given. As politician James Phelan put it in 1907, the Japanese immigrants represented an enemy within our gates.
Aha. Well, we showed them.
Probably Pat Buchanan read all that before he started giving his speeches. One book, The Valor of Ignorance by Homer Lay, L-E-A, led out this plan in great detail that included maps of western Washington, notably Grays Harbor County, as likely locations for the eventual military invasion, and it was a bestseller.
That's where I would have done it. I don't know what that's like.
Books such as these laid the groundwork for other bestsellers, such as Grant's Passing of the Great Race, Stoddard's The Rising Tide of Color, which were, as Kevin Cruz has shown us, pure expressions of white supremacist bigotry and eugenics.
Man, they love that stuff.
This is our history, American history. Whoops. You probably didn't learn this in school. They were also, more pointedly, primarily preoccupied with the threat of Asian invasion. There's no immediate danger of the world being swamped by black blood, but there's a very imminent danger that the white stocks may be swamped by Asiatic blood.
I can't even listen. Okay.
No, these works inspire political action, particularly along the Pacific coast. And it was primarily political figures from Washington who ultimately devised the 1924 Immigration Act. Okay. So we saw a lot of this. Phelan, the politician, said they must be excluded because they're non-assimilable. They're a permanently foreign element. They don't bring up families. They don't support churches, schools, theaters. In times of trial, they will not fight for Uncle Sam, but betray him.
Oh, well, that's what white people are doing now.
Right. So note the language. The common conception here was that Asian people were quite literally aliens, separate species, and they would never assimilate.
Interesting.
Right. In any event, Phelan had many cohorts up and down the coast. The most significant of these was a Seattle-based periodical publisher named Miller Freeman, who was a one-time legislator and ongoing power behind the throne in Republican politics in the state. He was also president of the Anti-Japanese League of Washington.
You could have that then.
Yeah. I mean, you could just openly say what you were doing. On the pages of his periodicals, he engaged in regular war and fear-mongering against the Japanese government, wanted them deported, wrote things like, "Is this to remain white man's land? The Japs are here," yada, yada. And just amazing stuff. Freeman's campaign single passage is several pieces of anti-immigrant legislation on the state level, primarily alien land law, prohibiting property ownership by aliens ineligible for citizenship. In those days, Asians couldn't be naturalized.
Yeah. Wow. We've come a long way. Not
Have we?
Really.
Yeah.
We've walked around in a lot. Well, a circle is a long way to walk.
Right. So
walking it.
It happened.
It's net zero, but I get you. All right.
So then it gets to the House, introduced a bill that would limit immigration to a 2% quota for each nationality, but further prohibiting anybody who was an alien ineligible for citizenship, obviously aimed at Asians, because they were ineligible. Bill easily passed the House, once in the Senate. It was not clear what was going to happen. President Calvin Coolidge was hesitant to insult the Japanese, but Republican Senator Henry Cabot Lodge of Massachusetts stood up in the Senate and denounced a letter from the Japanese ambassador, which had warned of grave consequences, as a veiled threat. And he led a stampede of Senate support for the House version of the bill. Then it was signed, and Japanese exclusion was now the law. The next day, mass protests exploded across Japan. The Japanese turned to the view of an inevitable war, anti-American boycotts, and reaction to the law was bitter and angry, and reaction to the U.S. was mixed.
Whoops. So,
and then militarists in Japan could and would use the Exclusion Act as evidence of America's feelings about Japan and ammunition in arguing for a more aggressive military buildup.
And then something 9/11.
Right. And Pearl S. Buck, who lived in Japan at the time, observed that the bill's passage also tolled the death knell for what was then a nascent pro-democracy movement among moderates and assured the ascendancy of the militants. And then, of course, World War II. So what you do and what you enact has consequences.
Yes.
And can come back to bite you later.
And this is why we need to return to the age of civility, like the 1910, 20, 30s, 40s, 50s, when people were civil and had anti-Japanese leagues and wrote books like this and caused World War II.
Right. So he ends with, obviously such bigotry was alive and well at the turn of the 20th century, and it's now alive and well again, manifested by people like Ingram and her millions of like-minded conservatives. So, yeah, that part of America is still intact. She has nothing to worry about. What the rest of us need to contemplate is how America has changed for the worse by not only permitting white nationalists and proto-fascists to spread and promote their toxic hatred of anybody who isn't white, but giving them a spot on cable TV.
Yeah.
So there's another boycott going on.
Okay, we're doing great.
Right. And so, yeah, only about half a dozen, well, that's an exaggeration, about a dozen to 2 dozen white nationalists actually showed up in D.C. for their counter protest, their anniversary white supremacy march, way outnumbered by counter protesters and the police.
Yes.
But, you know, the reason that march was so small is because a year's worth of condemnation by everybody else, and that's why all the stuff we say matters.
Yes.
No, they're not going away. Yes, they can be reduced to pitiful numbers, as somebody said. My bridal shower had more people in that.
Right.
But, you know, the reason it's so small is strictly because people protested and spoke up. So you cannot stay silent when stuff like this happens. And that's my sermon for today.
Okay, well,
I'm
that's
done.
a good way
Your
to
show.
end it. It was kind of it was I'm sure a huge disappointment to them, but a great success from my point of view. And yeah, that's a sentiment that's been echoed all around.
Are you talking about the march or my segment?
All of it, plus the anti-Japanese league that we propose restarting to make.
Who knew? You got to know where you're coming from to know where you got.
Yeah, it's amazing to be. You said, and you're quite right, obviously, that we weren't taught that history in high school, and it's one of those things that I don't know whether it would have been a good idea or not. Like, I'm afraid to leave it out, obviously, and just let people know this is where we're coming from. This is a long history. This is nothing new. On the other hand, I can imagine teaching this in high school, and occasionally you're going to get a student like Stephen Miller who says, "Oh, this is what I should be doing with my life."
Right.
And goes ahead and does it. And whose fault is it? You stupid public school teachers, you did this. I was telling them not to.
So we have more at the Pundit Roundup, and you'll have more on the show. But for right now, this is Greg Dworkin speaking with my good friend David Waldman, Kagro in the morning, reminiscing about all those good times when America was great again back in the 1910s and 20s. Take care, and I'll talk to you on Wednesday.
All right, very good. Thanks, Greg, and we'll look forward to that. Thank you again.
Yeah, got a primary coming up tomorrow for me. I have to go out and vote.
All these Tuesdays. Got to stop the Tuesdays.
Yeah.
All right, well, good. We'll figure out what happens.
See what we can do. All right, take care.
Thank you. You do the same. I will investigate the mystery of, as soon as I hit the music here, of why my 9:27 alarm is successfully silenced when I turn the volume on my phone down all the way before the show begins and flip the switch to silent. But the 10:58 alarm goes off full blast nonetheless. I have not changed any of the settings, but maybe it's just my phone is dying. We'll investigate that during the break, fix it in 1 minute, and cross our fingers and hope it worked. We'll be right back. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Thanks again to Greg Dworkin for carrying us through the first hour. Hard to make decisions about which direction to go next, although I am curious about whether or not dotard J. Trump did get around to continuing his... yes, another 20-minute pause. As I mentioned, I left off with the tweet about wacky Omarosa and mentioned to you that he tailed off with his comments saying people in the White House hated her. She was vicious but not smart, which I thought was very telling. And she was like vicious. But that's not a bad thing. But she also was not smart. You see, so now in combination, that's bad. I would rarely see her but heard, and then trailing off with an ellipses, although a 4-period ellipses, which would indicate normally in grammatical terms, in punctuation, that was the end of the thought, but a 3-period ellipsis, I guess, is supposed to continue. But it took him, looks like, about 23 minutes to get around to continuing the thought, which continues this way. I would rarely see her, but heard really bad things, nasty to people, and would constantly miss meetings and work, which is what we were hearing about Omarosa, too, except we thought, what does he care? He knows her very well, and what was she likely to be doing in the White House anyway? She really didn't have any particular qualifications for it. Neither did the president, neither did anybody he had surrounded himself with, so I guess par for the course. But I don't think the public had any great expectations of Omarosa when she joined the White House. And yeah, we did hear these things. And there's lots of stories. It's really been interesting. Now, with she's releasing the tapes, the knives are out for her, and there's lots of reports, although they're very interesting in that they're anonymously sourced reports of White House officials saying that they really loathed her and that they were afraid of her, which I don't really know how to take, but a lot of people are saying, she was intimidating and frightening because she was a black woman, and this is racism. And I mean, I'm sure it is racism. Everything they did was racism. I don't really know whether they really felt that way or they were instructed to say they felt that way, but one way or the other, obviously, they're clearly trying to play on the fears, I think, that Trump supporters have about black people in general. So sure, why not? Anyway, I guess it corroborates, with the stories anyway, is all I'm saying. It's like they colluded on their stories, what they were going to say after this. So let's see. Nasty to people and would constantly miss meetings and work. When General Kelly came on board, he told me she was a loser and nothing but problems. I told him to try working it out if possible, because she only said great things about me until she got fired. Which do you want to unpack that? I hear she's nasty to people, she's vicious, she's not smart, she would miss work constantly miss meetings. The chief of staff says she's a loser and nothing but problems. What did I say? I said, try to work it out, because she says great things about me. She misses work, she doesn't do anything, she's a problem, she stabs people in the back. I said, work it out. Because have you heard the great things that she says about me? This is the problem with the president, in addition to everything else. But I know you know that, but I feel like it needs to be said. He's so very dumb. It's sad. All right. I guess you're probably all on top of that story. I don't even know what to linger on it. It's just amazing. Once again, here we are, and I feel like I miss out in the morning. If I don't comment on it, if I can't do it on Twitter, I feel like I got to do it somewhere else. Listen, I have to tell you that this is just beyond the pale. I am distracted. You probably hear it in my voice. I cannot figure out what I have yet to watch the show, and I'll be admonished for watching the show because, as I mentioned in one of the previous programs, our friend Chief Beef Loco pointing out quite correctly, Sacha Baron Cohen, widely hailed as a comedic genius, in fact, true, trades in ethnic stereotyping and racism. It was his stock and trade. It's how he got famous, and you're not supposed to feel good about that. You shouldn't. And it's one of those situations where I laughed and it was funny, and then you realize, oh my God, I did the wrong thing here in acknowledging it at all. And in watching this thing, I didn't know, and then it was the thing, and then I don't know how to feel about it because reasons. And at bottom, what he's doing there is wrong. Now, the work he's doing now, I don't know whether it's any different or better or anything, but it's certainly been revealing. This new show, from what I hear about it, what is it? Who is America? Is that what it is? And I don't know what the hell he's doing. I'm curious by what magic he's getting people to do these things, because the things he gets politicians to go on camera and say and do, I cannot explain. I'm looking at the Hills tweet here. I'll have to retweet it. And just what kind of comment do I put in this? Well, I'll share it with you if you're listening live. Watch. It says they've got the video. Watch Sacha Baron Cohen's tricks pro-gun group leader into putting sex toy in his mouth. Now, that could be anything, but you know what makes for good video among the range of sex toys available or imaginable. And there are, of course, ways to present such sex toys which might, I don't know, in some contexts, might not necessarily be taken to mean what others might take it to mean. But then again, there are other ways of presenting such items that leave very little room for error, let us say. And this would be one of them. If you had, say, okay, again, the range of sex toys. How do I do this in radio? I mean, you could just say clinically speaking, but this is so much more fun. The range of sex toys available, right? Okay. You don't have to be imaginative. This is not a weird or esoteric one. Like, I don't know, that, you would have had to see maybe a catalog of items to know and understand or to conceptualize. This is like straight up the first one or two that comes to mind, let's say. And let us say further, if you're having difficulty guessing exactly which one because your sophistication with these things is such that, hey, I mean, it could be anything still. This would be one that could be, say, mounted with straps. Okay? And it is. And it's mounted right where it belongs, if it belongs anywhere. And this person has to, in order to put it in his mouth, has got to get right where this thing, there's no mistaking what you're doing. I can't understand how this could be done, except that the magic of Sacha Baron Cohen, I guess, is that he's giving people somehow license to reveal themselves, and they just do. And I don't know, they've spent the rest of their lives hiding it, but here they just don't. I don't know what to say. So, is there value enough in that to watch the show? I don't know. I guess you should make your own call, even though I'm sure that Chief Beef Loco would prefer that I tell you, no, listen, the truth is that you should not be watching it and you should not be patronizing him. I feel like there's something there to view, I guess. I don't know. I'm going to give up on this. Brian Monroe, thank you very much for saying this is a good way to tiptoe through that one. It makes it so much fun. I could have told you, I think, straight up what was going on here, but it's more interesting to try to think of a way to tease this through. Isn't it the teasing everyone enjoys the most? I don't really know why I'm talking about this anymore. All right, let's see. Other fantastic things here. D. Gordon Liddy commenting, our accountant is terrible and keeps screwing up our return, but I caution my family, try to stick with him because he tells me I'm handsome. And that's easy to imagine. All right, and Thelonious, thank you for helping us out with our faulty memories. The weirdo Republican who parachutes in to run for any office when the Republicans can't find anybody else is Alan Keyes, and I believe that's exactly the guy that I'm not sure that's who Greg was thinking of, but that's who I had in mind, and I think that fills in the blank rightly on that one. All right, where to go next? I don't know. I mean, so many possibilities. Let's see, what other did I have other things open? Oh, I wanted to report that Brad Heath is tweeting this one, the investigative reporter for USA Today covering law and justice, which is an interesting place to have an investigative reporter. That's good. A fourth federal judge, he tells us, this time one appointed by President Trump. So there's not a lot of those. I mean, he's appointed a lot, but the odds of drawing one in this case is pretty slim because he's not filled the entire judicial branch. But a fourth federal judge, one appointed by President Trump, has rejected a challenge to the special counsel's appointment. Once again, another claim that the special counsel's whole charge is unconstitutional, etc. But no, says Judge Dabney L. Friedrich, who is apparently a Trump appointee. Let's see. Here's Judge Friedrich's decision from the Twitter account big_cases. That is a real-time update on the latest filings and major cases in U.S. District Courts and U.S. Supreme Court, run by Brad Heath, so plugging his own stuff there, well worth doing. New filing. The case was United States... What is this? Here's Frederick's decision from Big Cases, hopefully back to working better than it was last week. Big Cases bought new filing in United States v. Concord Management and Consulting. Memorandum opinion. How did that get to be the style of the case? That was about, all right, well, you never know. We'll have to add that in the end when The Hill reports it to our very, very long Twitter thread of Trump courtroom failures. Have you ever seen that one? I have kept this thread going. I wish I had considered the line better when I did it, but I think the first time I did it for whatever news story that was coming out, was I said, he had been rejected in court again, and I was like, yeah, you're really good at getting stuff done or whatever, you dotard. And it just stuck, and it's maybe we'll run down the list some other time, but you can find it out there. Maybe I can dig it up and share it with you in the summary. But there's so many things, and it's been a theme on the show about how. Well, what do we call it? When we talk about it, we talk about just why don't you just ism. You know, that's Trump's belief that he can just come in and say the reason things don't get done in this country because politicians are so stupid. Why don't you just say this? Why don't you just do a presidential proclamation that says, or do this or that, and I learned that they were called executive orders. Why don't you just use an executive order? And it's because there's a judicial system in this country, and they can tell you, no, that thing you did is not authorized by law or unconstitutional. It's not unlimited power in the presidency, which, by the way, has not yet sunk in with people like Brett Kavanaugh. And one of the big dangers is, it's a long, long list of things that Trump has proposed, and maybe now I ought to even try and find it. See if I can dig it up this time. But many, many things that he's tried to do or order that just haven't worked out. And I guess here's the thing goes all the way back to April 23rd, when I was reacting to this story. Just in, federal court strikes down Trump administration delay of increased car efficiency fines. I mean, small potatoes compared to some of the other things he's tried to do by executive order, but just another example of, I just will order this to happen. No, the court says, no, you're an idiot. You can't just do that. Next one, just in, federal judge rejects Trump excuse for ending DACA, orders him to continue program. Judge rejects immunity claim, Trump immunity claim, orders him to face lawsuit from sexual misconduct accuser. Judge rejects Trump's bid to block access to Cohen materials seized during FBI raid. Judge rejects Trump's effort to dismiss emoluments clause lawsuit. Breaking, Nevada judge rejects Trump lawsuit on voting records. Breaking, federal judge blocks Trump repeal of Obama birth control mandate. Just in, federal judge blocks Trump from transferring U.S. citizen held as enemy combatant to Saudi Arabia against his will. Breaking, federal judge blocks Trump from stopping undocumented immigrants from getting abortions. Just in, federal judge blocks Trump order withholding federal funding from sanctuary cities. Judge dismisses Melania Trump's $150 million lawsuit against the Daily Mail. New York City judge rules against Donald Trump's company, says New York City building called Trump Place has the right to take down its signs. Federal judge rules Trump blocking people on Twitter is unconstitutional. And just this weekend we found out that that was the case, and then he just didn't unblock the people. Psh, what are they going to do, arrest me? I'm immune from everything. So that's another twist. Ex-Trump advisor saying Trump order ending immigrant family separation policy will be quickly struck down in court. Federal judge rules Trump must give migrants seeking asylum individualized parole hearings. Appeals court rules it's unconstitutional for Trump to withhold funding from sanctuary cities. Again, that was the appeals court. After losing, he appealed. And he lost on appeal, no surprise. And then finally, federal judge says Trump must fully restore DACA. That was the last time I sent one out on August 4th, and now we've got another one to add to this. You can see what we're getting at here. It's been a long, long list of failures for the why don't you just-ism administration, if you can call it an administration. All right, I didn't plan to go there. But as I said, these are things that I opened up, put aside for a possible discussion. And let's see. I mean, I don't even know where to go with this. Should we go more Omarosa stuff? Josh Marshall was talking about this earlier this morning, too. Let's see. He's saying WTAF, what the actual F, is this? White House staffers backgrounding to D.C. reporters that they were terrified of Omarosa because she was a physically intimidating black woman. They were, quote, paralyzed by fear. Also, why won't Stephen Miller just go on the record? But he's talking about Garance Frank Ruta's tweet from out of the Axios story. She's tweeting the quote she grabs from it, I'm scared less of her, crapless, not strapless, crapless. She is a physically intimidating presence, a male former colleague of Omarosa's told me. Is she large, or is she, are they just physically intimidated because she's black? I don't know if she's a big person or not. Like, is she tall or broad-shouldered as well? I don't know. I don't know enough about her. Anyway, this is dumb. But yet senior staff told whoever it is reporting, I guess, for Axios about this last year. They felt paralyzed because she was the only top-level official in the White House who was African-American. And that, I think, might mean something. They were just afraid of being caught out in being openly racist or being accused of being racist by someone who perhaps they thought might be willing to scream in their faces about it or go to the media with it, possibly. That could be it. And that brings us to another story, although now I'm kind of curious to look at the Axios thing. But I guess, you know what? Maybe in the interest of time and sanity, we'll just leave it there. You know what Axios has got to say about this. I doubt very much that there's anything else eye-opening in the Axios report. I could be wrong. Maybe we'll go back to it later. But interesting opening for more discussion. One of the other things that came of this, and I don't think I even bothered to put this aside because this was, again, another of those issues where it was like, well, of course, just like this morning, I didn't put aside word that, Stephen Miller's uncle in Politico had a piece that said, he's a huge hypocrite, Stephen Miller is, on immigration because our family, his family, would never have been able to enter the United States under the conditions he wants to now impose for immigration today. And it's kind of like, wow, shocking. We should know that story. And on the other hand, no, of course we know that story. Of course he's a hypocrite on immigration. They're all hypocrites on everything. This should surprise no one. I hate being part of this surprises you, Twitter, but really and truly, the Gimmitarian thing explains it all. Stephen Miller is in now, and he wants to be here, and he wants to exclude other people from what he's got, and that's all there is to it. Sure, he's a hypocrite. Of course. What else would he be doing there if he wasn't a hypocrite? But, I'm glad to have the information, glad to have the facts, and it's satisfying to know exactly how hypocritical he really is. Hooray. But one of the other things that I did not put aside, because it was also like, of course this is happening, was, let's see, I'll have to scroll through my Twitter feed to find it. I think I did retweet it over the weekend. Kellyanne Conway, once again, on the Sunday shows, and no one knows why they do that, and they really should stop, et cetera, et cetera. But she was on This Week on ABC, and it's the Omarosa thing, asking her about that. And Jonathan Karl asks a pretty good question, considering, one, the story is Omarosa, and two, he's speaking with Kellyanne Conway. So I guess he sort of saves the value of the segment by saying, essentially, even though he loses the thread on this one. Omarosa was the most prominent high-level African-American serving in the West Wing on President Trump's staff. And he skips right to, this is a good question, but again, it misses the introductory point. But I think it's well understood, and I think it was asked with a wink. So he says, well, who is that person now? He's basically saying, okay, Omarosa out. She's been out for a long time, but now she's back in the news. Reminder to everybody, she's out. She was the most prominent high-level African-American advisor to President, quote-unquote, President Trump, which by itself is a story because she didn't do anything in particular, and he didn't trust her in any particular way and didn't use her to any end, and she didn't appear interested in doing any work at the White House either. So all of this is bad stuff. Your highest-ranking African-American advisor has no interest in helping you do anything, whether it's about other African-Americans or not. But, okay, that's the wink part. Wink, wink, this was a dumb idea in the first place. But now, pretending that this was serious, who's left? Who's the highest-ranking black advisor in the Trump White House West Wing? And Kellyanne Conway cannot answer that because she can't. There isn't anybody. And it's one of the most amazing things to see her twist and turn in this thing. The answers she gives is incredible. First of all, I guess, I don't know, I didn't time it, but others were saying, and it's probably an exaggeration, that it took her 60 seconds to come up with this, because the whole clip is 2 minutes. So, but apparently, after hemming and hawing for a while, and you can see the gears turning in her head, and she's very thin, you can see them actually turning underneath her skin. I need the name of a black person. And I might do well to, she might have been thinking I need the name of somebody who's got a name that's plausibly ethnically black, so that if I say, Bill Jones, because no one knows who Bill Jones is, because there really aren't any, this is the whole point, is there's no prominent African Americans working in the Trump White House, West Wing or otherwise, in jobs for which they would be well known by the public. So, okay. So, and maybe that the only one she can think of happens to have a name that she thinks sounds black. She puts, the way she puts it. So who, with Omarosa gone, who's the most high-level African-American advisor to the president in the West Wing? And her answer at first is, okay, I need time. Your question, John, is so wrong. It's so awful. You totally skip over the fact that our fabulous Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and world-famous neurosurgeon, world-renowned neurosurgeon, Dr. Ben Carson, he works with the president every day and works so hard to try to eliminate poverty and to break the cycle. And so, blah, 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 spin, whatever. And John says, yeah, okay, but in the White House, he's the secretary. Well, that's a cabinet position. And she's holding on to that. And there's a point, sort of, in there, but he's asking, on staff in the White House, who? Well, he works with Secretary Carson every day. He doesn't talk to him hardly at all. The fact checkers let us know later on. But so basically, no, listen, you're limited to the West Wing, Kellyanne. Who do you have? And she says, well, Geron's done a terrific job working with the president. He used to work with Omarosa all the time, and he works with the president every day. Yeah, right. Geron. That's a person's first name. I don't know if that's who she was thinking of. I don't know what. I don't know if that's the only name she had. I don't know if she knows who Geron is. Geron's last name, I will admit, notoriously difficult to pronounce, so I don't blame her for not trying to let us know that it's Geron Smith, which you probably could have made up, even if you didn't remember. But, that's how familiar she is with Geron. Well, Geron is there. He's done a fantastic job. I'm like, oh my God, she's not going to say, what does he do? I'm not sure, but at least he's got a policy position, right? You're not going to say something terrible like, Geron was an intern and he did a terrific job photocopying things and collating all the pages. They were all in the right order. What do you and people did some research on Twitter, and they very quickly found that there was a Geron Smith on the payroll in the White House. And it seems like a nice job. They're paying him $83,000 a year, which is great. But that's a lower level job in the White House in terms of like access to the president and working with him every day to break the cycle of poverty sort of claims. Of course, he's working on urban issues because that's what black people do. Get it? In the Trump White House. Oh, you're black. I got a thing for you. Urban something or other. You're Mr. President, I'm a neurosurgeon. I know, but you're a black one. So housing and urban development. How's that? Health and Human Services. Surgeon General. I'm a surgeon. Yeah. Urban. Okay. Fine. So Geron exists as a real person. I don't know whether he thinks he works with the president every day or not. I just thought that was an astonishing sort of moment there, and it really was almost worth sitting through a few minutes of Sunday show tape just to see her squirm. And then, of course, she's Kellyanne Conway. She's not completely detached from reality. She knows she's like losing this fight. Like, okay, I don't think the Geron thing was a slam dunk. What else have I got? And the answer is nothing, because the way she's really amazingly skilled in a way. The segment that the clip anyway ends with her attempting to turn this on its head and to, John Carl, you're the real racist here because Korean War. How so? Yeah, she ends the segment like, you're not really interested in this, and you're just covering it for the shock value or whatever. Just like you only gave, I think she claims, 24 seconds of worth of coverage to when our fabulous, fantastical. Why is my music not playing? What did I figure out was the problem last time the music wasn't playing? And I don't think I figured it out until after the show. Why would this? There we go. All right, well, at least we got some music. Here are a couple of buttons. But yeah, you only gave 24 seconds to our fabulous vice president when he greeted the remains being returned from North Korea of our fallen veterans from the Korean War. How did that even get into the discussion? That's Kellyanne for you. Don't put her on TV. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio, with the music still playing a little while longer than usual in the background. Don't mind that. We'll use it for a short pause to try and figure out which direction to go next. I mean, there's a lot of stories, some of which really require some depth. Maybe we'll just round up a couple of lightning round stories and go to something medium length and save the really juicy stuff for tomorrow. Devin Nunes is back in the news. And for this one, I'll thank Durati over at Daily Kos for covering this one. Good catch here. One of those things that even in normal-ish times we might not catch in the normal news cycle. You can't cover everyone doing everything. Where in the world is Devin Nunes? And that's always actually a good question. You want to track that guy because sometimes he's sneaking into and out of secure facilities and then into the White House at night. This time, no, he's sneaking into and out of, or I guess he's not even sneaking, he's just hoping no one notices. He's in Azerbaijan, which by itself is a little unusual in terms of places to be during a summer recess. But okay, members of Congress travel the world on fact-finding missions. He's on a witness tampering mission, however, according to Durati. And I tend to believe that because he's just that kind of a guy. Let's see if I can get a better view of the story here this way, from the traditional view rather than the mobile view, and catch up on what he's doing and why anyone would think it's witness tampering. So, Durati begins. Bobby Three Bludgeons, that's a better name for him, is right now actively seeking to interview Azerbaijan-born Russian pop star Emin Agalarov. You remember him, of course. He's the one who had his publicist set up the Trump Tower meeting with Donnie Dumb S. is how he's referred to here. So where else would Devin Nunes be but meeting with Emin's father-in-law? And you forgot about the father-in-law. The father is a powerful pirate/mob figure in Putin's Russia, but his father-in-law is the what in Azerbaijan? What do you think? He's the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. And so this, according to an excerpt from Azer News, azernews.az, which I assume means it's right there in Azerbaijan, President of the Republic of Azerbaijan, that's their republic, Ilham Aliyev, has received a U.S. congressional delegation led by Chairman of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, Devin Nunes, and including other member of the committee here, Rick Crawford. So I guess remember that name too. The successful development of the bilateral relations between the Republic of Azerbaijan and the United States of America in political, economic, energy, and security areas was stressed at the meeting. A message from our president: let's do a bilateral. The sides said Chairman of the United States House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence Devin Nunes' visit to Azerbaijan will contribute to the expansion of cooperation. Azerbaijan's active support for peacemaking operations in Afghanistan was hailed. That sounds good. And the sides expressed their confidence that the two countries will continue making efforts to combat international terrorism. The sides exchanged views over regional security and settlement of the Armenia-Azerbaijan Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Another of the world's, well, not the world's, but our forgotten conflicts. It's not one of our conflicts. I was going to say that, and I went the other direction because we're not in that conflict. But another conflict we've forgotten because, I don't know, it's in a weird place and you can't pronounce it. And I'm as guilty of that as anybody. Yes, I am sure, the story continues, the 3-decade-old border dispute was high on their agenda items, but the official account above seems to lack some truthiness, so let's see a Twitter breakdown. A couple of tweets from Olga Lautman. Olga Lautman, let's click on it and see who's Olga. She is the New York City freelance investigative journalist documenting members of the Trump regime and monitors Russian and Ukrainian news. All right, well, we'll have to take that at face value for the moment. Olga says, can someone tell me what Devin Nunes is doing in Azerbaijan? On a side note, Trump's business partner Agalarov's son used to be married. Oh, are they divorced now? To the president's daughter. Strange place to visit on break, apparently, and I don't know that it necessarily is. Emin Agalarov, of course, son of Aras Agalarov, an Azerbaijani-Russian billionaire, married at one point anyway to Leyla Aliyeva, the daughter of the president of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev. The couple have twin sons, Ali and Mikhail, and a daughter, Amina. They divorced in May of 2015. Okay, and, well, that's interesting. And reminding us, another tweet from Olga, reminding us who is Emin Agalarov. We know who he is and that he set up the meeting. Let's see, Barbette here tweeting, give me a break. Rand Paul goes to Russia. Devin Nunes goes to Azerbaijan. Are they planning an exit strategy? Other further disruptive tactics, et cetera, et cetera. So lots of people speculating on this stuff. And, of course, a quick reminder from a clip from The New Yorker magazine that Azerbaijan also the site of Trump's money laundering Baku project, Donald Trump's worst deal, the title of their piece on his hotel in Azerbaijan. And that was the one that I think at one point he put Ivanka in charge of, and then, it turned out to have been financed in part by Iran's Revolutionary Guard. So maybe that's bad too, et cetera, et cetera. Not a lot of good things going on for the Trumps in Azerbaijan. So we'll see. Not much in the way of actual revelations from reporters about what they might actually have been doing there. Just a question, and we're going to have to keep an eye, always keep an eye on where Devin Nunes is. And he's rarely up to any good, even when he stays in the United States. So the idea that he would be flying around the world and to former Soviet republics in particular is always at least a little worrisome. All right, let's see. Other interesting things. This one we'll save for tomorrow. And rather than tease you with it, I'll just say, okay, we'll get to that one later on. Here's another story or two that deserves some time. Let's see. One was a tweet from Adrian LaFrance, editor of The Atlantic. I did not know that. Okay, excellent. I read a lot of things from The Atlantic. Editor-in-chief or an editor, I'm not sure which. I don't keep up on those things, but The Atlantic's doing a bang-up job these days. Sometimes they lay an egg too, but whatever. Adrian herself has this to say. The Trump campaign appears to be selling the logo rights to the Space Force. Now he keeps announcing we're going to have Space Force all the way. The most juvenile thing possible to say about the also most juvenile possible proposed branch of the armed forces, but whatever. They're selling the logo rights. It doesn't have one yet. Of course, nothing is official about the Space Force at this point, but they're selling like Space Force logo, proposed logo, T-shirts, patches, hats, I don't know what. But pointing out correctly here, Adrian says, in exchange for campaign donations, they're selling the logo rights to this Space Force thing, turning the government, once again, into a tool for Trump's own political and probably personal enrichment. Space Force is peak Trump. is the name of the piece in The Atlantic written by David Graham, and I guess edited, or at least passing across Adrian's desk, too. So, real interesting. And so, yeah, the deal is the Trump re-election campaign sent an email inviting supporters to vote on a logo for the Space Force. And they gave a couple options, and they're all mostly terrible and pretty juvenile, to be quite honest, and whatever. And lots of them have like rocket ships, like cartoonish rocket ships in them. So I hope none of those wins. I said waits because one of them says Mars awaits in Space Force. And I've never really been clear. I never bothered to read what does Trump really want Space Force to do. I realize that there's like actual, military operations that take place in space or that involve space. And, there's a space command in the Air Force, and I could see the most adult possible explanation for Space Force could be, well, we'd like to separate that out of the Air Force and leave the Air Force in charge of air breathing, as they might call it. In other words, atmospheric threats and our countermeasures to them and our defensive measures, whereas Space Command would take care of the higher elevation work above and outside of the atmosphere. Though, say, things like intercontinental ballistic missiles do a little bit of both, and there'll be crossover, and there's nuance to everything. You see, you can't just draw lines in black and white. Okay, here's another story well worth noting. This one from Mother Jones and Pema. I'm sorry, Pema. You say Pema, you think, or Pema? P-E-M-A. Pema Levy has this tweet. It's not just Chris Kobach. 3 vote-suppressing secretaries of state are overseeing their own elections in 2018. I don't think we got a chance to mention it the other day, but yes, if there's a recount of some kind in Chris Kobach's race, he, as Secretary of State, will be overseeing the process, which is probably, by most civilized nations regarded as something of an amazing conflict of interest, but he has announced already he's not recusing himself from it. I don't know whether that's going to change or whether the courts will intercede, but once again, something that no other politician would likely consider doing. Kobach is going to charge in, and what do I care? And if the courts tell me they're wrong, they're the ones that are wrong. They're pre-wrong in this, and Brett Kavanaugh and I will take care of it. We know what we're doing. We went to Harvard and Yale and whatnot, and so all these stupid judges that like the ones I listed for you earlier, are all going to be overturned eventually because we say so, because we're gimitarians. But this is a rather interesting story because we focused. We didn't do the story, but I know that a lot of you heard the story elsewhere that Kobach was doing this. And seems like an important point that he's not the only one. An August 11th piece in Mother Jones, that's the title again. It's not just Kobach. 3 vote-suppressing secretaries of state are overseeing their own elections. Let's quickly get to it. Tuesday's too close to call Republican primary election for Kansas governor has plunged the state into an ethics crisis. Not an ethics crisis. Oh, no. Let's have some sound. Tuesday's election, once again. Now we're going to be on the next Tuesday. It's been a week. Have they settled this thing? Not to my knowledge. Secretary of State Chris Kobach emerged with a 121-vote lead over incumbent Governor Jeff Collier, at least as of the publication date here of August 11th, heading into the weekend. But Kobach, the most prominent national advocate for policies that make it harder to vote, is in charge of overseeing the state's elections. That's his passion. That's what he loves to do with his position. After days of mounting pressure, Kobach on Friday agreed grudgingly, is that right, to let his top deputy oversee the recount. Still, maybe it's been updated now. Okay, still, that doesn't negate the glaring conflicts of interest in a race where a candidate has shaped the state's election policies from the start. And if he emerges on top, will oversee his general election race this fall. This episode highlights an oddity of state-level politics, secretaries of state presiding over their own elections. I guess that probably would happen fairly frequently since people use it as a stepping stone to new positions. But I guess in places where they win overwhelmingly or get crushed, it just doesn't come up very often. This year, three Republican secretaries of state with a history of restricting access to the ballot, because that's what Republican secretaries of state do, will be presiding over elections in which they are a candidate for higher office. The potential for conflict is not new, nor is it not limited to one party. How do I take that? That's probably actually true. It is. Anyway, but in an era where voting rights are an increasingly partisan issue, which is amazing, having politicians overseeing elections, particularly their own, creates an additional incentive for dishonest or politically motivated election oversight. Yep. It's a problem that most Western democracies don't have. Instead, nonpartisan professionals administer elections. But in the United States, says Rick Hazen, an election law expert at the University of California Irvine School of Law, we've talked about him before, conflicts of interest are inevitable. Many elected secretaries of state with aspirations to higher office feel an allegiance to their party, whose support they'll need. Yep. But the problem is of a different magnitude when the elected official is supervising an election or a recount where the Secretary of State himself or herself is on the ballot. Hazen said in an email, the conflicts of interest is extreme. The conflict is extreme, obviously, and the best course of action is for the Secretary to recuse from all decisions involving the counting of votes, recounts, and any further legal or administrative action. No person should be a judge of his or her own case. Kobach has insisted there is no conflict overseeing a recount of his own race. The recount thing is done on a county level, so the Secretary of State does not actually participate directly in the recount, Kobach said. So why not recuse, right? Well, eventually I guess he did. That's what he said on Wednesday, 2 days before he did, in fact, recuse himself, allegedly. But, I guess that's another thing. I mean, for someone like Chris Kobach, I recuse myself. What does that mean? That means I've said I recuse myself, so if you find out that I didn't recuse myself and accuse me of it, you're wrong. Because I said I recused myself. And I went and did all the things I was going to do anyway, but I said the magic words. The Secretary's office, he continued, merely serves as a coordinating entity overseeing it all, but not actually counting the votes, just adding up what the counts are and deciding whether or not to throw those counts out. You see what I mean? It's just balls and strikes. Of course, I just call balls and strikes. However, you've all just struck out. I call balls and strikes. I don't call them fairly, but I do call just balls and strikes. Or I'm not going to allow pitches to be thrown. That's another thing. And the rules are that if pitches aren't thrown, the game is called, and whoever is in first place at the time, at the end of the season wins. You get the idea. You can manipulate the rules from any number of angles. There is the potential, though, for Kobach to shape the outcome. The day after the election, Kobach appeared to lead with 191 votes. That margin was slashed by 100 votes when it turned out that one county had reported 522 votes for Collier, but the Secretary of State's website showed 422. The county clerk blamed Kobach's office for entering the wrong number into its system. Whoops. Kobach's lead grew to 121 on Thursday when certain county vote totals were adjusted. A spokesman for Collier also told the Kansas City Star that Kobach's office had instructed local officials to disregard mail-in ballots if the postmark is smudged. Collier is counting on mail-ins and provisional ballots to erase his deficit in the race. Now, why would the postmark smudging be a problem? I guess if you can't tell the date, maybe that's something, but, what if the other part of the postmark is smudged? Does that count? Even before Tuesday, Kobach helped set the policies that determined who could vote in Kansas in the first place, right? Early in his tenure, Kobach lobbied the state legislature to pass a draconian voter ID bill that required photo identification to cast a ballot and proof of citizenship to register to vote. Due to this provision, between 2013 and 2016, more than 16,000 people had their voter registrations canceled, and more than 31,000 Kansans had been blocked from registering to vote. In June, federal judge Julie Robinson threw out the proof of citizenship requirement because, quote, the magnitude of potentially disenfranchised voters cannot be justified by the scant evidence of non-citizen voter fraud. So I guess open question, how many of those people heard the news and went back and registered and did so successfully? Because I would say that of the 16,000 people who wanted to vote but had their registrations canceled, or 31,000 people blocked from registering to vote, and if some of them had been, or all of them had been blocked wrongly, I would suspect that in their first opportunity to vote for or against the guy who did that to them, that they would probably be strongly inclined to vote against that person. although not all of them would have been voting in the Republican primary. That's true. 2 other Republican secretaries of state, though, that's the point of this article, who have pushed for similarly restrictive voting regulations are also running for higher office and overseeing their own races. Brian Kemp, you know that guy because he's the Secretary of State of Georgia, and he recently won his state's primary for governor in July. Kemp has been the subject of multiple lawsuits alleging that his office failed to process the registration applications of minority voters. Last year, Kemp's office settled a federal suit that accused his office of disenfranchising minority voters by rejecting registration applications on which the applicant's personal information did not exactly match their information in state databases. On several occasions, his office has responded to these allegations by investigating the voter advocacy groups and the ones that tried to help people. Oh, when I registered for my driver's license, I gave them my full name and my middle initial, David J. Waldman. They misheard me, or there was a typo, and it got entered as David K. Waldman. And now I've registered to vote, and I say my name is David J. Waldman, because it is. But the DMV says David K. Waldman. Something's wrong here. And rather than saying you need to have your license corrected, they just say, well, there's a conflict, and what we do with that is you're not allowed to register to vote. Gee whiz. In Ohio, Republican Secretary of State John Husted, I don't know, Husted, what does he say? Husted. Ohio people may have no idea. John, Jon, there's no H in this. The H is in the last name. Husted, Husted, is running for lieutenant governor in November. He has purged more than 2 million people from the state's voter rolls since taking office in 2011. In a close race this fall, it's possible that those purged could have made the difference. There are myriad ways a Secretary of State can hinder a political opponent. In Florida, for example, voters almost lost their chance to register to vote in fall 2016 when Hurricane Matthew caused mass evacuations ahead of the registration deadline. The Republican Secretary of State, Ken Detzner, refused to extend the deadline. State Democrats sued, and a federal judge ultimately extended it. Kemp was also sued for not extending registration in his state, which was also slammed by the storm. But Kemp prevailed. So in Georgia, they don't think that's a problem. In Florida, they happen to think it is one until that judge is, let's say, murdered and replaced. The most infamous, and our author here says famous, case of a Secretary of State with a conflict of interest came in 2000 when Florida Secretary of State Katherine Harris, co-chair of George W. Bush's Florida campaign, oversaw the Florida recount that handed Bush the presidency. Yep. 4 years later, Ohio Republican Secretary of State Ken Blackwell, the guy who I thought was Michael Steele the other day. Very good. Totally not racist. Good thing to do there, Dave. Co-chaired Bush's Ohio campaign while overseeing the election in the hotly contested swing state. Blackwell was sued for engaging in voter suppression tactics targeting Democratic voters, including instructing local poll workers to deny provisional ballots to voters who didn't meet certain criteria. Couldn't even get a provisional ballot. In another maneuver, he required all voter registration applications to be submitted on 80-pound cardstock. That was a good one, wasn't it? In 2006, Blackwell remained Secretary of State while running for governor. Let's see. There's a little bit more here. Do you want to know a little bit more about what a bad guy Blackwell was? There's only 2 more paragraphs. Blackwell forced Ohio to grapple with an ultra-partisan Secretary of State using his office to influence an election. Can an elections chief be so partisan that his ability to manage a clean vote comes into question? The Columbus Dispatch asked in a 2005 editorial. In Blackwell's case, yes. In 2007, experts at Ohio State University studied Blackwell's tenure and recommended that the state make the Secretary of State position nonpartisan. Doesn't help a whole lot, but okay. Last year, Blackwell was named to Trump's Voter Integrity Commission, overseen by Kobach, which was a farce to begin with. I didn't even remember that part. As debates surrounding ballot access become increasingly partisan, secretaries of state have become more tempted to administer elections in a partisan way. Voter ID policies, strict registration requirements, and voter fraud alarmism can help Republican secretaries of state win supporters in their party and climb to higher office, but they rarely, if ever, create fairer elections. Secretary of State is increasingly a kind of politicized position, where you can go from Secretary of State and run for governor for higher office, says Michael Kang, an election law expert at Northwestern Pritzker Law School. In years to come, Kang believes the conflicts of interest will only get worse. So, eye on at least 2 others in addition to Kobach, and a couple that preceded him, too. All right, a few minutes left here. Let's see. Got a piece here which we might be able to cram in, but, I'm starting to doubt it if the computer's not responding very quickly. But I recommend it to you. Ordinarily, I don't know how I'd feel about this one, but you all have arrived at this conclusion already. Anyway, let's take a look. The opinion piece from the end of last week, Ann Applebaum in the Washington Post. Are you still sure there's no need to worry? Summed up a lot of our fears and worries. Don't worry. The institutions will stop him. You know who we're talking about. Or, don't worry. He hasn't done any real damage yet. The institutions have stopped him. How many times have you heard some version of this analysis since the election of President Trump? Sometimes the speaker is an optimist, someone with faith in the U.S. Constitution. Sometimes the speaker is a skeptic, someone who dislikes the alleged hysteria of those who think Trump's corrupt habits, autocratic language, and authoritarian behavior are doing lasting damage. Either way, they are reassured and reassuring. Congress will stop him. Who says that? The judiciary will stop him. I have a list of places that they have. The FBI, the Republican Party, the Constitution will stop him. Don't worry. But America's federal institutions are not the only ones designed to prevent someone like Trump from undermining the Constitution. We have other kinds of institutions too, legal organs, regulatory bodies, banks, that are supposed to prevent men like Trump from staying in business. This is the key part here, let alone acquiring political power. The truth is that many of these equally important American institutions failed a long time ago. Trump is not the cause of their failure, he is the result. Some of that institutional failure is on display at the trial of Paul Manafort, Trump's 2016 campaign chairman. Here's a man who is alleged to have declared income as loans, concealed foreign bank accounts, and lied about money that Ukrainian oligarchs / pirates / mobsters were paying him via shell companies in Cyprus. For decades, in other words, U.S. law enforcement institutions were unable to spot the money laundering, tax evasion, and fraud that his partner Rick Gates spent several hours describing, even when carried out by a prominent person. As long ago as 1985, Manafort's name featured in Jacob Weisberg's still famous New Republic cover story about Roger Stone, then his consulting partner. The headline, "The State-of-the-Art Washington Sleazeball." For decades, Manafort's political consultancy, and that's in scare quotes, has helped crooks and autocrats retain power. But even leaving aside the question of morality, why wasn't Manafort put out of business for suspected fraud years ago? Or Donald Trump? That's the whole point of this. Did the police not have the resources, the motivation? Whatever the reason here, for the optimists and skeptics is a clear institutional failure. A society allegedly obsessed with law and order, so much so that it has the highest incarceration rates in the world for black people, couldn't be bothered to investigate a famously sleazy white man who was spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on antique rugs and men's suits in Northern Virginia. And by the way, what's the big complaint about black people who become rich because they happen to be famous and highly able sports figures? Well, they spend all their money on, I don't know, antique rugs and men's suits. But the weird colors of suits, that's the thing, you see? They got no respect. Get a gray suit. The same kinds of failures appear in Trump's own career. This is the big point. Nearly 40 years ago, in 1980, Trump employed 200 illegal Polish workers to destroy the Bonwit Teller department store, a historic building on Fifth Avenue, to make way for what would become Trump Tower. The men earned half the union wage and worked in 12-hour shifts without hard hats. At one point, their contractor stopped paying them. Eventually, they sued. In 1998, Trump paid $1.375 million to settle the case. Trump broke immigration law and employment law, violated union rules, yet neither immigration authorities nor employment regulators nor union bosses put him out of business. Why not? Why were the terms of that settlement kept confidential? Why, with his track record, was he allowed to get a casino license? Building permits. Wall Street banks did, it's true, stop lending to him, but when he began looking for cash abroad, doing extremely dodgy deals in Georgia and Azerbaijan, for example, no one stopped him. As Adam Davidson in the New Yorker has written, so many partners of the Trump Organization have been fined, sued, or criminally investigated for financial crimes, it's hard to ascribe the pattern to coincidence or even to shoddy due diligence. But shoddy due diligence usually brings legal consequences. Why wasn't the company shut down years ago? There is more. Turn over one stone and you'll find another. Trump has a record of destroying historic buildings. Why did the federal government allow him to lease the old post office building? Now, Trump International Hotel in Washington. The terms of that lease explicitly forbid any elected official from holding it. Why was that small piece of the law overlooked? Supposedly, rule of law is an important principle to any Western society, perhaps the most important principle. Belief in the judicial system is what makes contracts work and commerce possible. Even-handed enforcement of the law is what separates rules-based democracy from whimsical autocracy. Listen closely as Manafort's trial unfolds. Long before Trump got to Washington, and long before Manafort helped him get there, judicial and law enforcement institutions failed to stop them. Are you sure that there is no need to worry? Sorry to have gobbled up all the time that I would usually use to promote what's coming up next on Justice Putnam's West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. We'll try and cram a little bit of that in after this.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Well, I'll never be able to get all this in here, but let me just assure you that once again, all of the things that needed talking about today that we couldn't get to because of all the things that needed talking about on our show will be talked about on the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy up next right here on Netroots Radio. Keep it tuned here all day long. You'll be glad you did. You won't find news like this